My name is Carl Quo, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Today, we're talking with Jason Coleman, founder of Sparkypants Studios. Jason has been making games for a long time, and honestly is a bit of a legend for me. I've played many of his games through the years, from some of his earliest, like Civ 2, Alpha Centauri, and Rise of Nations, to his latest, Mind Over Magic. I got to know Jason through One Up Ventures, a community we're both a part of, and was finally able to get him to sit down and be on the podcast. This is a bit of a unique one, as Sparkypants is one of the longest running journeys we've had on the show at almost 15 years, but also one that is coming to an end. Sitting down and talking with the founder about the end of the journey is something I've long wanted to do, but for obvious reasons can be hard to find someone willing and able to talk through it. Jason shared a lot of great perspective and thoughts, and I'm really endlessly grateful that he chose to do so. This is a great one. Let's jump in. The place that I always tend to start with the questions is, there was undoubtedly something where you were like, okay, I'm going to go and start a company. And you were probably thinking about it for a little bit. And then eventually you're like, nope, I'm committed. Like mentally and emotionally, this is happening. This is going. And I know you've done this a few times. And so I'm curious, what was that moment that you really decided to go and found Sparkypants, and how did coming to that moment differ from your first couple times at the startup journey?
Yeah, I gotta say it didn't work. It didn't happen that way at all. So Sparkypants, I'll start. Just saying, Sparkypants is sort of an accidental company. I did not intend to found another company. Mm-hmm. And then Big Huge, it was at Firaxis, which is great. Microprose is great, and Firaxis was even better. But basically, I just was really interested in doing other games. I felt like we were going to keep doing Civilization games, and we were really into RTS and all that. So that was more a case of a combination of my putting it out there a bit, and then Brian Reynolds, I think, hearing about it, and then that coincided with some of his feelings about wanting to do some stuff, and then that sort of started the whole thing. So it just kind of go, and I was so young and dumb then. That it was just like no fear. That was actually, I remember I quit Firaxis, started a new company when we did not have funding at that point. We did not find it. Brian actually bootstrapped us a bit, some cash. Quit my job. We had a baby within a month, and I bought a house. Is that right? Yeah, I think that's all right. So it was just, but and I just look back on that. I'm like, I had zero fear of it. And then later, when I left Big Huge after we sold it, I was very burnt out, particularly after various stuff that happened after we resold it. And it took me, I don't know, 4 or 6 months just to kind of get back to where I was interested in doing anything. And then I was really interested in just making new stuff again, and making it small. So I did like a little frog checkers game with a friend that we all native iOS, just so I could learn iOS and Objective-C, and rendering on it and all that. Very cool game, by the way. We had one of our artists from Big Huge who joined us and did really cool art. And then I got hooked up with Spryfox through a friend. That's where I first met David Edery. And then I started working with Dan Cook on what became Leap Day, and we kind of co-developed that. And so Leap Day, this is going somewhere. Leap Day was, it was kind of a precursor to like Factorio and games like that. And it's actually want to totally get it out there again. And we keep getting asked by former players, even though it was a small set. Can you please put it out? But it's sort of like, some of its downfall may have been that both Dan and I went together and did the worst of all our impulses in terms of just like trying to do everything, this multiplayer co-op game that lasted multiple days and all this. But it was super interesting. And that actually really attracted people I'd worked with before who were just like, hey, man, I love what you're doing and like working with you. And is there any way I can join up and work together? And that started with like one person. And so I was like, okay, how can I do this? So we started doing some contracting to like pay the bills. So we could work on other games. And then a couple more joined in the same way. And it was basically sort of the lead of tech from Big Huge. And we just wanted to work together again. And so that's kind of how it started. So very accidental for Sparkypants. Later it was much more, okay, now we're trying stuff and we did bigger things and all that. But the goal was just for me just to go make some stuff that I thought was cool, and not have any of the trappings of really big teams. Or of course we were been 70 people at one point at Sparkypants, so I kind of screwed that up. So I swore to my wife, I'm not going to have a big team ever again. And then we went.
And then you went, oops, 70 people.
Yeah.
I mean, so in that journey of sort of like, oh, I guess I have a company and we're all just working and we're having fun. And like, obviously that evolved significantly, to both get to 70 people and releasing their own games and all that kind of stuff. But like, at what point did it sort of formalize for you that this wasn't just me and my buddies doing some contracting just for funsies and turn into like, oh, this is, oops, I founded a company and now that's a founding journey, right?
Yeah, I mean, just to get all that set up, I mean, we formally founded it, but it was kind of a question of what it would be. We had all sorts of crazy schemes. I mean, we tried to do this sort of Pinko Kami, like sharing of like how we would share the profits and whatnot, and really formalize that in the contracts. And we had like, what were we called, Sparky at the time? I forgot. Sparky points or something like that you would earn, and you would sort of get back. So we had all sorts of things about how do we work together as a coalition, but as a company, but then people can sort of feel independent. That was kind of rolling along. And so one of the things that was a tension was that some of us were contracting so that others could do prototypes, which seemed like a cool idea, but wasn't great for probably either side in terms of, hey, all I'm doing is contracting. I mean, nobody was really complaining, but there was definitely tension there. And then for the people, for a while, it was just one person prototyping. They felt a lot of pressure. Got all these guys supporting me so I can do this thing and come together. And I think that warped some of our conversations. It clearly wasn't that great. But we were earning decent money from the contracting, so we had built up a bit of a pile. And then what happened was we got a call from Kevin Perry at Microsoft that wanted to meet at GDC, and we were going there to pitch what we thought was a final pitch to Sony for a game that we were working on, and we had a prototype. But we changed the prototype a bunch recently, and we went there to that meeting, and the reaction was like, well, we liked what you were doing. Why'd you change everything? So that meeting did not go well. I mean, they were nice, but it was clear that was not a good meeting. And then we went to this random meeting with Kevin Perry where he wanted to have dinner. And basically he was looking for an RTS team. This is going to be a kind of a long story if I keep going, so you have to tell me to cut off. But he was looking for an RTS team to take these assets that they had or make this new thing. And he was the one that was putting together, a remaster of Rise of Nations and Age of Empires and getting those out. And they were making a lot of money on, getting on Steam. I think they were doing really well. Anybody could see. So he had sort of this like, oh, maybe he can like do his own game. And so he was reaching out for an RTS team. And we totally checked all the boxes because we were sort of the core of what an RTS is before. So we had this dinner, and that morphed into his wanting us to do a game with him. Then it turns out that he found out he had to do a whole pitch process. So we did the pitch process, but then we were selected. And so we started down that, and we eventually signed a deal with Microsoft. And it took a long time to get it signed. And so meanwhile, we were working on kind of statements of work. And then they, like the week after we got it signed, they had a reorg. And so they never actually saw anything from us, but we were canceled. And which turned out, I got to say, Microsoft was super cool to us. Like we had a pretty good term for convenience, and they had just given us a chunk, our first chunk, and then the term for convenience. And they were very cool with working out so that we could take what we had done and what we were working on. And so that became the foundations of Drop Zone. And that was when, okay, now we have like a real thing. Like when we signed up with Microsoft and we started all that, now we had some real money to go and try to do something. I think it was, $4 million or $3 million or something. So it wasn't a ton, but it was a good, for what we're trying to do, but it was a good seed for that. And then we went off and like pitched around, and the game was very exciting to pitch. It was a very pitchable game. So we ended up signing a deal with GameForge. That was pretty, and that's where we did Drop Zone. We built our own engine for it. We grew to like 70 people. Executed super well. The idea was not a good one for the market, but so it's still up there, but it's 1 or 2 players a day. So, but yeah, that was really Drop Zone. I think was the transition into, okay, we're back in the business of growing a company to support what we're doing.
Yeah. So that definitely takes us through sort of like the series of things that happen that put you in the position of like, okay, I'm growing a company. For you individually, especially as a repeat founder who had sworn to his wife that he was never going to scale a company again, talk to me a little bit about that individual journey for yourself as a founder of like suddenly realizing, oh, this is no longer, this is the serious business of fun and games, not just the casual business of fun and games.
Well, I think, I think I have one of my, I was actually talking about it today. I think maybe one of my things that makes it painful for me is I think I'm pretty ambitious, but I'm also fairly unwilling to bend values at all. And I think that's actually pretty hard. Like it's, so the ambition side was definitely, this is I had co-run a large, fairly, 150 person studio, but I hadn't done all of it. I hadn't been the face of it in terms of business. And so, and I was very upfront that, just from an ego or experience perspective, I was really, I didn't care about, the accolades of being in the front, but I really wanted to experience like all of that, like, and actually do it and to see if I could and see what I could do well and what I couldn't. Or at least that's what I told myself is like, this is a reason why this is cool. And I think it's just conditioning of someone's going to like offer you these deals and I just felt like you have to take them. So there was definitely some of it just my going along. But I was also excited about the prospect. The other thing I did early, which just in terms of advice is, I had made a moderate amount of money on the sale of Big Huge and spent a fair amount of that on sort of supporting Sparkypants at various points. Don't advise it. Spend someone else's money, not your own money. But, I don't super regret it because I had so many cool experiences. But yeah, that was kind of that. But yeah, I think I don't think it was super intentional. I don't think I got super intentional about it until way later. When we took investment, I said, okay, we're gonna figure out, can we actually make this successful?
We'll jump back to the investment here in a minute, but first, like from that initial group of like, you sort of described it as you and a friend started doing stuff, and then you had, other friends slowly join or people join as you sort of built this up. And then I imagine there was some sort of, incorporation that happened early on to exist as an entity and do all the boring operational stuff. But then at that moment where you were starting to pitch a thing and starting to like get publishing deals for it and all that kind of stuff, where you sort of said, okay, here's the first formalization of things. How did you decide, like, these folks are co-founders and really in it with me versus these folks are like employees, right? Like, was there much of a distinction, and how did you navigate that distinction?
Well, I was the sole founder, and I stayed that way, which is not really my. Later, I tried to rectify it. It's not my first choice, but it was mostly, I'd put a lot of money in as part of it, and yeah, so I just ended up being. I mean, eventually, way later, gave out stock and whatnot, stock options. But yeah, there wasn't much there. Yeah, I think that just wasn't a big discussion. I think part of it was also that by the time we had really gotten to where we were going to do Drop Zone, we had gotten quite a few former colleagues together. So it was now, I mean, we had, I think, 15 people in my basement at one point. We totally destroyed my basement. Turns out, air conditioning in a residential home is not work that great. And I think that was another impulse for me. I just loved working with those guys. It was old friends that I'd worked with before. And it was all the best of the best. And so it's like driving a supercar in terms of development. So it's super fun. But yeah, the founding part stayed solo for quite a while. It later was a tension for me because I did not like being the sole founder.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that journey, right? Because like I think solo founding, at least as far as guests I've had on the show, is relatively rare, and especially someone who I've talked to a couple solo founders who are still pretty early on their journey and chose to solo found. I solo found my first studio, and I would not necessarily recommend other people solo found either. But I'm curious about like that journey for you. What, obviously you were in a situation where you had folks that you had worked with for a really long time, you knew really well. And so there's a part of that makes all of that much smoother. But like, where did it start to creep in, the tension of being the solo founder, where you didn't have outlets, where you did, and what you sort of missed about, or like you've talked about wanting to rectify it? Like, what were the gaps you were looking to fill? Just someone's shoulder to cry on, or like, what parts were you trying to offload, or how were you looking to balance that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was mostly that my experience at Big Huge was so positive, like with founders, like my co-founders. And one of the things we did there is we had each of the disciplines essentially represented. And I just thought that worked really well in terms of cross-checking each other and supporting each other. It was not very lonely ever. Yeah, I mean, that part was just great. Like, and we developed a better and better relationship over the years. It wasn't without tension, but the tensions that we had, I think, were founded on like actual fundamental issues that were just things had changed, and it was just hard to resolve them. And so I just missed that a lot, the Sparkypants. And the problem that I always faced, though, is just how to make that transition and how to do it, because I had a lot of senior people, or like, and so I didn't really want 6 co-founders
Mm-hmm.
or 6. So it made it really delayed, and we actually didn't do it until just a couple of years ago that I finally got it set up. It was also expensive and difficult to figure out how to do tax-wise after the fact without, we had to become a profits share and all that kind of stuff and disentangle all that. So it was not without a lot of effort to do it. But yeah, it's mostly just how I always struggled with how to do it, and then how to message to the team if you weren't in that group. It was very difficult. So I'm still the sole, but we've been small enough to where I have a couple who essentially can co-manage with me, and they have a significant portion of the company. I now have, I think, 36 or 40% instead of 100%, and the rest has been parceled out to different people.
Really quickly, I'd love to use you a little bit to communicate something that's hard to communicate to people who haven't lived through it, which is sort of that difference between having co-founders versus having very senior employees that you know really well, right? Like you sort of lived through that situation where you clearly had a team that you had super good relationships with, super deep working relationships with, and you still look at that and live through that, and we're like, but I miss having that co-founder group at Big Huge that was different. Could you maybe just like reflect a little bit and try to explain those differences? Because I think a lot of people, especially, we have people who listen to the show who are thinking about founding something, but who haven't founded it, who have maybe never been in a situation where they would truly understand the distinction between a founder versus an employee and that kind of thing. So maybe just like hum a few bars about where you really felt that distinction and what was the real differential there.
Yeah, I think probably a few pieces. One, I'm always really sensitive to like differences in power dynamic and trying to counter those. And so just the fact that, if they're not founders and they don't have equal rights within the company all through, there's a power dynamic that's different. And so, and I think that like that meshes or that combines a little with my tendency that the scout leader should take the worst tent, maybe to a fault. And basically like if there's, you tend to get over credit as a leader, and you reap a lot of the benefits if things go well. And so when things are going poorly, I feel like, okay, you got to go deal with it. So when it comes to hard times or the potential for something like layoffs, it definitely feels like, or it felt like I had to be the one to really think about it and to make the decisions and to deal with it and to talk to as many of the people myself as I could. And when you're co-founders, I mean, there's two aspects. They're co-founders, so like you're all equal say, and you all feel like, okay, everybody's got to carry their load, right? And it's also, we kind of grew up together as founders, like pretty young, and then we spent a decade at Big Huge. And so that dynamic of support and having learned together, like all the pieces of what it actually is to be a founder and to think about things in that way, you have in common. And so your ability to just sort of carry each other from time to time is really there. And I feel, it's not that I wouldn't ask for that. I mean, I have been carried multiple times by the team or by the senior team. But I'm more hesitant to ask for that. And so, yeah, my default is just to go and try to tank it myself if it's the painful parts. And there've been a lot of painful parts. So it's, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I mean, it totally does. I think, part of my hope for this podcast and besides just getting to listen to great stories, especially people I respect and whose games I've played for way too long at this point, I won't age both of us with that, is also in part to like help folks who are thinking about going on this journey just try to understand what's in store, or what are some of the options that are in store. And it's hard to get that detail out of, just reading an article, but like hearing a story and understanding like, okay, this is what I should expect for my co-founders, not even what like I could hope for out of co-founders, but what I should expect, and why people always talk about finding co-founders is so hard in many ways, right? Is because of these expectations, right? So
yeah, it's very much a marriage. I mean, it's just in many ways more so for a lot because you spend a lot of time with these people, and there's often a lot at stake, like in terms of people's sense of their place and whether that's being, or even their desires, like what's it for? I mean, one of the conflicts we actually kind of had at Big Huge at times was, what is the company for? Is it for the founders or is it for everybody? And I don't think there's actually a totally right answer to that, but those are very different worldviews. So those, just getting those, and there could be much bigger things that people can disagree on or run into conflict on.
So you mentioned that things sort of went to a different level as far as like you taking it I don't want to say seriously because that makes it sound like before that you weren't taking it seriously, but as far as like the formality of it all, when, Sparkypants took on investors, right? And obviously we met through OneUp, so I know OneUp is one of your investors, but it sounds like prior to that, you had started very much bootstrapped. You had moved into contracting work to sort of pay the bills, and then you got some publishing deals along the way. But like, how has Sparkypants sort of been funded and stuck around for as long as it has, in whatever detail you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, I mean, we did. I mean, after Dropzone, we did another thing. We did the Elder Scrolls Legends redo to try to keep that game going with ZeniMax, and that was kind of wild. That's a whole separate story. But it was. I'm both super proud of it because I think it was a pretty much impossible task, and also doing a complete ground up rewrite from scratch without being able to see any of the original stuff other than the game itself. But it was also brutal and not a lot of upside necessarily for us. And so after that, I was just like, okay, if I'm going to keep doing this, it's got to be what we really want to be doing. And I had tried various ways to make it happen. If Elder Scrolls had really worked, then maybe that would have funded us to do other stuff, but it didn't. And so the only way I saw was to take investment so that we could get back to making original games and doing all the things that we thought would actually potentially be successful for a game. So that was really it. And so I started asking around and started preparing for that. I'm a terrible pitcher for company. I mean, really bad. I mean, I'm probably fine pitching, but just my story was not that great. We'd go into certain VCs and they say, "Why don't you just tell us what we want to hear?" Very, very difficult for me. So, we basically, I think we would have just wound down at that point. Except, we did get investment that would really work for us. Clay was an investor. It was our lead investor, Clay Entertainment, and then OneUp. And so, and they're just, perfect in terms of they will totally leave us alone, but they also believe in us and all. So, yeah, that's how we got going. But that was the intentionality. That was like, if we're going to do this, we're going to be sure we're not, because I feel like you just get into this thing where you start making trade-offs and you get further and further. And it's really easy to just get into a situation where like, you have something going, you're just trying to keep it going, and it's no longer really what you wanted at all. So it was really a conscious effort to try to get back to that.
What's the biggest difference between, like, I mean, I guess it's such a winding journey in many ways that this question may not be as applicable as it often is, but like, I feel like people walk into especially formal fundraising, and so this could kind of apply to your time pitching for publishers and stuff, but also the path that led you to Clay and OneUp. What was the biggest difference for you between how you thought fundraising would go and how it actually went? Like, what sort of things did you walk in being like, oh, it's going to go like this, and this is how this all works? And then,
I didn't have a lot of expectations other than I thought maybe our ends and recommends would like just maybe automatically make some things happen. I think that maybe the surprising thing was how many layers there were to go through before something would get approved. Because we would get through stages of like, oh yeah, this looks like it's totally going to happen, and it would go to some other person or some group, and they would decide no. So that was probably the biggest surprise. But I knew pretty early that I wasn't. I didn't have the gift for coming up with a story that was really going to hit like VCs and whatnot. So it was going to be strategics or, strategic likes. Clay was kind of a strategic play for them. They needed certain things that would be useful. So, but yeah, I think I was pretty naive. I didn't have a lot of theories. I was pretty naive about it all. Oh, I should say I'd done lots of pitching for publishing, like for games, but trying to pitch a company was just a very different experience.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely very different things. Like publishers are like, what game? Why game successful? Why
Yeah.
you right person to make a game, right? Whereas VCs are like, well, what's the company and what's your unfair advantage and
Yeah.
who are you, right? Like,
How are you gonna, how are you gonna make us $1 billion in 4 months?
yeah, exactly. But even when you're dealing with VCs, I think are a very particular version of this. But when you're dealing with strategics and a lot of more traditional like investors rather than sort of project financing, the question really is about what is the studio and what is the story of that like corporate entity and what it will be. That can be very foreign for folks who are only used to pitching projects and project financing stuff. I'm curious, you've mentioned a couple times that you never felt like you could find that story. And I'm wondering if you can diagnose or sort of reflect on why. What was hard about that story, or you finding that story to tell? Like, because I've maybe I'm idealistic, but I find it hard to believe that there isn't a story. It's just you struggle to find the right way to express it, or a mismatch of like what you thought the story was versus VCs especially want a very particular pattern matching story, right? Like, so what about that journey to find the story sort of did you find confounding or like?
Well, I felt like I could have come up with a story. I did have stories I could tell. They just weren't what we wanted to do. And so, I mean, there was all sorts of grandiose stuff I could like put out there, but it was all things that I didn't fully believe in. And I think what we actually wanted to do was to, try to hit doubles on games that we could, that would be unique and well marketable for Steam, and then eventually, try to be self-sustaining in that way, and then eventually hit one out of the park. Very much like a Clay or Supergiant kind of models were kind of the comps. But I don't think their stories are very good either if you're trying to pitch them that way, right? It's just like it's so like looking back on the past. And so, yeah, so I just struggled with, really we want to go and explore, try to come up with concepts with a team who could super execute. So we're not worried about that part. Explore concepts and then get some stuff out and see what sticks. Yeah, see, it's a terrible story. It is. I did. The best I had was mostly. Just so many of the huge hits were not funded like any or like developed in any way like people were funding. This idea that you're gonna like dump $20 or $30 million into a first time thing and that's gonna make Minecraft is not just how it just hasn't happened. Once a thing is proven and built up, then you can franchise it. You can like go big. But it just seems that for games themselves, like if you're doing platforms or something, or then it's very different. I think it's easier to have a story, but the idea that you're just gonna make a game and be able to see it from the beginning, it's just nobody can do it. And usually it comes from pretty small investments that then grow up. So that was mostly my pitch was let's start small and then we'll go big.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty classic challenge, right? Because like I do think that for when you look at the game industry, to your point, there's so many of those that are like even the hits that came out this year that are like, oh my god, these came out of nowhere and stuff. It's like, well, they didn't because they came out of those folks building game after game after game after game, and then maybe this is a new one with a new entity, but there was a lot of them learning small ahead of time, right?
So you got Fortnite, which is kind of this pivot off of like a game that's totally different. Just
Baldur's Gate 3 is on the back of Divinity and all these other things, right?
Hades is on. Hades would be like sort of, or Supergiant would be kind of ideal in many ways to me that they were able to make enough money to do the next thing. And then they learned from each one and they got better and better at the craft with the same team. which I think the thing that's so frustrating overall is just, I think it would be easier to shut a company down and like get money than it is to go and get money as a company that's put out a game that hasn't quite hit. In spite of the fact that you actually have, it takes a lot to get to that point, build up the expertise and all. And so, like Supergiant was able to do that through a series until they were like at Hades. But all that built upon previous experience.
When you look back, so you've been on this founder's journey a couple times, right? And you've done both with co-founders, you've done solo founding. When you look back across it now, what do you feel like your biggest struggle has been in that founder's role? And how have you been approaching mitigating that struggle?
I think overall, it was just seeing reality, because there's just a balance of, for sort of, you want to be realistic strategically, but then tactically you want to just be go, go, go and optimistic. And I'm a pretty optimistic person, and I'm go, go, go. And I just don't think, I think I have often not seen the harsh realities clearly enough about what it's going to take or whether this is actually going to work. I mean, I had background doubt. I mean, Dropzone, I certainly had doubts even from the beginning about certain aspects of it. There were certain aspects of it that were amazing, and I was worried about some of the things that I didn't understand them all, but they ended up being kind of, I think, fundamental problems. And I think if I'd seen that clearer and faced it more clearly early on, maybe it would have had a different outcome. I think doing the Elder Scrolls game while we got through it, how hard it is to go rebuild a game. And I don't know why I thought it would be okay in a year with like 20 people, 25 people, that had been developed for years. But I just think that I did not, I kind of knew it. Like, I think you often know that this is a weakness. You're just unwilling to face it. And it was really on when we did Mind Over Magic that I started really thinking about, like, okay, what is the reality here? Like, how do we actually make this work? How important it is not just to make a cool game, but to have a good publisher. And all those things have to work to have any chance, because it's only the top ones that win. And that's even gotten more so since then. Like, I'm even more attuned to, what all you need to do. Because like one of the things that happened when we took investment is we were doing a pivot. And so we were still, I still kept it at, I shrank way down, but I kept it at 15 people, which is just a huge number to start a game like Mind Over Magic. Like, we should have started with 3 and kept it there for 6 months or even a year, and then you could grow. So that, probably doubled the cost of the game, which is part of why we had struggles. Otherwise, it would have probably made enough already. So,
when you think about living in that founder's chair, and sort of, especially when you don't have necessarily the support of co-founders, right? Like, what are the primary support structures you've built around yourself to help on the sort of emotional side of being a founder, right?
Well, part of it, I think, the team itself. I try to be very open, like not in a burdensome way, but just, I try to have I do have real relationships with all the folks. And so I am able to lean on them. I definitely like hold it back longer than I would if it were founders, but eventually I'm like, hey, I'm really feeling it. I need some help here. Can you guys take on these things so I can work on this? I'm just feeling overwhelmed. And I've been able to do that. They've been fantastic at just helping. We have various sayings internally. One of them is everyone needs to be carried from time to time. And so I think it's actually good to set an example in that way. I mean, not good that I have to do it. That it happens is important. And I can use that when someone else says, hey, man, everyone carried me during this time, and now we're going to help you out. So yeah, I think, one of the things that is really foundational about our company is we mostly exist because we like to work together. we want to do interesting things, and that creates an environment where I do think I can lean on people more than otherwise.
What's some stuff that, like, as you potentially continue to be a founder, or as you think about, being in that sort of founder seat, or even that like strong leadership seat, where are gaps that you're like, I wish I had more support on this or that, and like, if I keep doing this, or if I ever do it again, I would need to build up support structures around this thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I mean, we may be winding down as a company. Mind Over Magic has done pretty well, but it was definitely expensive to make, and so I knew that before we were going to leave early access, and so I gave notice to the team pretty early, like a few months before we were going to ship, and saying, "Hey, we're not going to. I just can't guarantee that we're going to be able to keep everyone, and so it's better to give you notice now, and then if you stay, we can give severance and some decent severance." So that's what we did. So we ended up going down all the way to 5. We once again attempted to start doing some contracting and then support and some prototyping. And so we had a couple of us working on a prototype, and then others of us, me included, were working on contracting and consulting to pay the bills. And the idea was we could get far enough and then try to get a publishing deal. And some of it was on the backs of the somewhat critical success of Mind Over Magic and decent sales, and those combined, we're doing something in a similar genre. Maybe we can just make this happen. And the thing that actually made me decide that just wasn't going to work was having a little bit of flashbacks to early attempt at that. Although it was 2 people this time working on a prototype, and that was better. But then, I watched just actually some of it in like One-Up, some people who had just really cool games pretty far along and were struggling to get even finishing funds. And I was just like, this is crazy. Like, this is just not, I just don't believe it's going to happen until we have something really far along, and I don't know how to get us there. And so that's why I've decided that we basically all converted to contracting and consulting, and we may stick together in some form in that way, and maybe we'll do something or try to continue working on the games in some form aside from that, or people may just go their own ways and we'll find out. But so I'm not sure because of the state I'm in. I will say, just in terms of like forewarning of stress of being a founder that you don't necessarily realize, I'm working just as hard now, basically. I work really hard. I care a lot about who I'm contracting for. But I can disassociate in ways that I never could as a founder. So my blood pressure is way down. And so, I mean, I do have a lot less stress because it is all consuming. And it pretty much has been. I mean, we started in 2011. So I've been in that state for a long time. And so, I don't know, like in terms of like ongoing support, but I may just continue contracting for a while and take a breather from it.
You're one of the only guests, actually. I was going to say one of the first, but you're the only guest we've had on really sort of at that precipice of potential end to a founding journey, right? We've had some other repeat founders on who have talked about what it was like to sort of end their first journey and start fresh on their new one. But one of the things I'd love to talk a little bit about is, as you come towards the end of this journey, right? Thinking as a founder and on this individual path, right? What, like, I don't want to ask something just as open-ended as like, what's it been like? But like, what are the big sort of lessons, especially with this ending journey? Because Big Huge was a little bit more of like an acquisition and that kind of stuff. Like
that was rough. We got paid for it being rough. So.
Yeah. Well, and like it's always like, I think every founding journey is like, it's rough, but it's a different kind of rough than this other founding journey, right? And so I'm curious, like, what are big, revelations or lessons or things that you feel you'd want to pass on to other people to know about, like, hey, when you're thinking about a founding journey, talking about the start is easy or straightforward really in a lot of ways, but here's what to think about the potential end of a founding journey as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely thought a lot. I mean, not even now, but I've had quite a few failures in various ways, just the successes, and I've thought a lot about, like, what does it mean to have a successful company? What does it mean to has Sparkypants been a success? And I feel like it has. I mean, I feel like we have, hopefully almost all for the good, or mostly for the good, but touched a lot of lives. We've had a lot of people come through and work for us. Careers have been started. I think there's a mentality of how to treat each other that started at Big Huge, and we've continued and maybe even multiplied at Sparkypants, that isn't or hasn't been super common in the industry in all places. And so I know for a fact that people have left and gone elsewhere and taken that kind of attitude, and that's had an impact. And so that's super special. Yeah, I had other thoughts. But I just think back on all the people that have come through, and so that's a big deal. I guess the other is just, it's going to have an end, and how will you feel about it, and how will you feel about how you treated people, and how you went about things. And I feel pretty damn good about how I at least attempted to treat everyone. I have less than a handful, I think, of regrets of which I've apologized for over the almost 15 years. And so that definitely helps me, like, have closure on it if it's gonna come to the end. The hard, outside of people, the hard part for me is I hate games going away. I really didn't let, it pains me that the Elder Scrolls Legends game eventually had to be taken down. Had lots of players who still loved it. And Drop Zone, which has, a handful of players playing it regularly, seeing it go away, have the servers up, and all the work that we did just represents a lot of people. And so trying to figure out what I'm going to do about that. I'm going to open source it. I don't know what we're going to do or what we can do, but those pieces I think are I have thought about them in the past, just what would we do, but those are just things that trying to figure out how to deal with it. Online only games, man, it's painful. It's painful when they vanish. Painful for the developers, painful for players. Just don't like to see art like that go away.
I mean, for what it's worth, 14, 15 years feels like an eternity in the games industry at this point. And so, like, that is definitely a pretty successful run. And as, shipping, like, to your point, shipping multiple games, touching that many lives, and as a Mind Over Magic player, like, I deeply appreciate the effort that y'all did and put out in the world. I think it's great. So I, at least as an outside observer, would categorize this deeply in the success column for what it's worth.
Yeah. Super happy that, and I'm also full credit to Clay as well for really helping us, finish it up, and I'm super glad that we were able to actually put out something that we can be proud of, and would like to work on it more. Maybe we'll be able to, but we'll find some way. But I am pretty proud of that.
I usually close out the main part of the interview with what I call an entirely unfair question. And I was thinking about this today. I was like, is it entirely unfair for you? I think it is, just given the moment, but it's often asking the question at the very beginning of a founder's journey is a different kind of unfair. But given the experience thus far, both with Sparkypants and with Big Huge before that, and all the journeys along the way, would you ever found another company?
I would say no, except I said that before. So I don't really know. But I don't know. Probably not. But I could see working with my friends on a game that then turns into a company again.
So not intentionally, but maybe oops, another company may happen.
Yeah, it could happen.
That's totally fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah, I definitely just feeling responsible for people, but also trying not to be paternalistic is just, it's really tiring.
It is a very tough line to walk. 100%.
So letting people like live their own lives and make their own decisions, but also trying to take care of them.
Well, it's almost like being around kids.
Yeah, totally.
Which isn't in and of itself paternalistic. But anyway, the way I like to close out episodes is by doing what I call the introspection lightning round, which these are co-founder dating questions that I used basically with folks when I was starting my companies to sort of get a sense of like, hey, who are we as people? How will we mesh if we were founders together? And really just a great starting point to begin that potential conversation of like, should we be co-founders together? What it's like. And so I'm just going to subject you to them more in a lightning round style versus how I normally would, which is we would both show up with answers and compare them. But I always like to start with, what is your superpower?
Can I give? Well, I'm very reliable. If there's a way, I'll probably figure it out whether it's painful or not. And I'll say my other, which was very surprising, I do think I've done this long enough, and I've made most of the mistakes, or I've seen most of the mistakes. That's somehow translated to a lot of empathy. So I can. If someone's done something wrong, I've probably either seen it or done it. So.
I always think it's interesting where the line is between superpowers that you're just like, I don't know why I do this, but like, I'm just great at it from the start, right? Like I'm just naturally good at it, which is how I think a lot of people start out with superpowers. And then there's the like, I have hard-won long-term wisdom that has now transcended to the point where it is a superpower. And I think those are super valuable too. Outside of your superpowers, what are your biggest strengths?
I think the thing that makes me a little bit unicorny is I've been basically continuously hands-on on code and development for 25 years, and full stack of everything, while also doing many of the other roles of executive production or production at various times. I've been QA. I've not done art or audio in a game, but otherwise I've done all of them. And so I think one of the things that does is it maintains a lot of craft respect, and so that helps attract top tier people to work with me. So, and again, I've made so many mistakes also that's helped to give me perspective.
You know all the people to call when that mistake is made.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, you called this person. The flip side of this is, what are your big weaknesses?
Probably similar. I get bogged down in individual contribution. Probably ignore things as someone who should be running the company because I can have an impact now on this thing as an individual contributor. But I also think that I mentioned it before, but I think the ambition without, of just, when I say ambition, I mean in kind of the amorphous way of just, oh yeah, I want to be successful, combined with some of my values. It's just hard to, again, I think there's ways that I could pitch things that probably could land money that I wouldn't feel comfortable because I wouldn't necessarily think that it's a good idea. So.
And one of those weaknesses that is also maybe a strength of like, you have to believe in a thing to pitch it, but when you pitch it, you believe in the thing, right?
Yeah.
What behaviors are your stress reactions? So like professionally at work, like when you get super stressed out, when you're under a lot of stress, how does your behavior change?
Well, I had my first panic attack like 2004, like during Rise of Legends, and it just hit out of the blue. I actually didn't feel that. This is the way you learn that you don't have to feel stress. Like it didn't feel like bad stress. It was just, I've been working constantly, so cortisol levels were always high. So that was a reaction, and it turns out that those are really hard to get rid of once you start having them. I don't really have those, but I'll definitely go into I just can't work. I really just need to, if it gets really bad, back off. But it has to get pretty bad. I do have a pretty high tolerance for a lot of at least what I would consider good stress. Just striving really hard. The hard times are like, the thing that I most struggle with. The thing that most stresses me out is just things not being in my control. So it's all the if you have a publisher, are they going to have a reorg and call you up on Monday and everything's changed, your whole life's changed, and those things I find really stressful, but also not much I can do about them. So I try to be zen about them. Say what will be will be.
I find that is easier to say than to live, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it's very intentional. Like when it happened, I do I go into like, okay, I'm in the moment.
Yep.
Got the people around me, got my family. I'm not going to be killed immediately from I'm not going to die instantly because something's going to happen to the company. We'll just figure it out.
Yeah, I found that I know I said I wasn't going to share any of my sentences, but just as a reaction to that, I found that I often will say oh, whatever will happen, and we'll make it work. I still stress myself out worrying about what will happen, but I do find that what's nice about when something does happen is I have developed a good mindset of rolling with the punch of I don't overthink what has happened, what could have been, all that kind of stuff. I'm like, cool, what is the right next action? What is just let's ignore all that. What is the right next action? Let's not dwell on it. And that serves me very well once something happens, but I am just a ball of anxiety before that. So
yeah, I've gotten better at that, but I'd say better only in the last few years. So it's taken me a long time in my life to get to the point where I can just say, okay, well, I think the big one is just learning not to stress over things that might happen.
Yep.
I've definitely gotten better at that. Just putting it aside.
Well, I will strive to follow in your footsteps there. And the final lightning round question is, what are your upkeep needs? What are the things that you need to have happen at work on a regular basis to keep you from getting into your stress reactions?
I need to run pretty much every morning. I need to play some music, guitar, and work-wise, I just need to be able to take action. So I've been burnt out, and I can work myself out of it if it's interesting work. And if I'm sort of at my peak of powers, I'm like, okay, I can apply myself and have a real impact. That's very, very flow state to me. And I can work long hours doing that if it's that kind of work. So yeah, that's part of the reason I've stayed in the code and and I love learning. I love learning the new technologies, and every time, and it's constantly changing, but it's also the same as before, and they come back, and it's always very interesting and satisfying to me. And the other thing, I should say, a fundamental thing to my nature for everything is I just like making things better, and I love finding better ways to do things. And so it is a super thrill to me, and I know it will happen. Every year, at least, have some totally new way of doing stuff in game development or whatever that we'll discover. It's why haven't we done this our whole lives? But it's super exciting. I don't know. I love finding those. So.
Yeah, those are always very fun moments. Well, amazing, Jason. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing all of your lessons and stories of the journey with Sparkypants. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. I didn't go into a ball of tears or anything, so successful.
Success. If folks want to get in touch with you, if they heard your story and want to connect on something, if it's one of your old friends who's I really want to work with you again, let's go Accidental Company number 2. Yeah. What's the best way for folks to reach out and get in touch with you?
Jason@Sparkypants.com.
Well, thank you. I have reinstalled Mind Over Magic because I knew I was going to talk to you, and it made me think about the game, and so I'm going to go play it some more.
Cool.
But thank you so much for being on.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games, And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.